I met Daniela at a party of mutual friends on a night when I wasn't even planning to leave the house. I had just gone through a troubled relationship and was in a phase of personal reconstruction. I didn't want a commitment, nor did I expect to meet someone who would affect me so deeply. But there she was. Daniela was one of those people who light up any room they enter. Her laughter echoed through the hall, and I was intrigued, almost hypnotized. I struck up a casual conversation, and she quickly won me over with her spontaneous and charming demeanor. The conversation flowed as if we had known each other for years, and I soon realized there was something special there. We exchanged phone numbers, and after a few messages back and forth, we began seeing each other regularly. I knew I was diving into something serious, something that would change my life, but at that moment, I was willing to take the risk. The first few months were perfect. Daniela and I had similar tastes, but also differences that only added to what we had. She loved outdoor adventures, and I, until then more of a homebody, discovered a side of me I didn't even know existed. Together, we went hiking, traveled, and explored cities and places I would never have ventured to alone. It was as if Daniela had taught me to live more fully. Over time, the relationship evolved, and soon we were planning to live together. I believed I had found the person I wanted to share my life with. Daniela seemed to feel the same way, always talking about the future, the trips we would take, the house we would buy, even about having children one day. It felt surreal, but at the same time, right. Our relationship had a solid foundation. At least, that's what I thought. Mutual trust was something I valued and that Daniela reinforced. She always said that trust was the pillar of any relationship and that without it, no love would survive. I believed her, and even unknowingly, her words disarmed me for what was to come. I never imagined that someone who talked so much about the importance of trust could betray mine. Our families and close friends already saw us as the perfect couple, always together, supporting each other in everything. I helped her grow professionally, and she always encouraged me in my projects. Daniela was intelligent and had clear ambitions, and I loved watching her achieve her goals. Our relationship was, for me, the example of a modern love where both supported each other and grew together. Until then, Daniela had never given me any reason to distrust her. There had never been a serious argument, a fight that crossed the line. Of course, we had our differences, but we always resolved everything with conversations, hugs, and a coffee early the next day. To me, it all felt too perfect to even imagine that something could go wrong. This was the Daniela I knew who taught me about trust, love, and companionship. Deep down, I thought we were unshakable, that nothing could affect what we had built. I was wrong. It all started subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, there were small details that seemed insignificant. Messages she replied to more curtly, some unexpected silences, that smile that seemed a bit forced. I thought it was work stress. After all, Daniela was in a new and challenging project. She herself said she was exhausted, always racing against tight deadlines and with immense pressure on her shoulders. As the weeks went by, these moments intensified. Daniela began leaving home earlier and arriving later, often too exhausted for any conversation. When I asked about work, she was vague. Before, she loved sharing everything about her day, the problems, the successes, even the office gossip. Now she would respond with a "it was tiring" or "the usual," without giving many details. I also noticed that her phone was always nearby. Not that I had a habit of snooping, but I realized that even at home, she kept the device close all the time. Once, during dinner, her phone buzzed with a notification. When I glanced over, she quickly pulled the phone onto her lap and smiled nervously, as if I had caught her doing something she shouldn't. That reaction stayed with me, but at the time, I chose to ignore it, trying not to feed paranoid thoughts. The changes continued. She started to avoid moments we used to cherish, like lazy Sundays watching movies on the couch. Instead, unexpected work commitments or invitations from friends for events I didn't know about popped up. With each new excuse, a part of me felt a slight pang of insecurity, but I forced myself to trust her. After all, who was I to doubt someone who always talked about the importance of trust? One specific incident began to make me even more uneasy. One night, she mentioned that she had a last-minute meeting and that she might be back late. I thought it was strange, but I didn't question it. However, later, while scrolling through social media, I saw a photo posted by one of her friends. It was a selfie in a restaurant with Daniela in the background. There didn't seem to be any meeting at all. In the picture, she was smiling, with a group of friends, and she hadn't mentioned anything about this outing. Even so, I thought it might just have been something she decided to do afterward, a quick outing to unwind. These moments began to accumulate, small things that were eroding my confidence. My heart said something was wrong, but my head tried to rationalize it, thinking it was all an exaggeration on my part. I tried to convince myself that it was a stressful phase, that maybe she was just looking for space to cope with the pressure. But still, it was hard to ignore the changes and the feeling that something was happening beneath the surface. Over time, Daniela became increasingly evasive, and that Daniela from before, cheerful, vibrant, and open, seemed to drift further away from me, a little more each day. It wasn't easy to admit, but I was starting to have my doubts. The situation reached a point where her silence felt heavier than any words. Every time Daniela looked away or responded with those "never mind" or "it's nothing," I felt something breaking inside me. I had never been jealous or the type of person to pry into someone else's life, but I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own relationship. On one of those strange nights, I decided I needed to know more. I began to observe her reactions more closely, looking for details that might give me a clue about what was happening. I didn't want to jump to hasty conclusions, but it was inevitable to feel a knot forming in my throat every time she smiled at her phone or seemed lost in distant thoughts. One night I gathered my courage and decided to ask subtly, "Danny, is everything okay? I've noticed you've been a bit distant lately." She looked up, surprised, but soon smiled with that smile that no longer convinced me. "Of course, love. It's just work. It's been crazy. I barely have time for myself." I nodded, trying to accept her response, but unable to hide my unease. "If you need help, I'm here. I don't want to see you like this, so exhausted." She simply nodded, with a hint of irritation in her voice. "I know, you've already said that." That tone put me on alert. Daniela had never been defensive like this. For someone who always preached the importance of communication, she seemed to be avoiding any serious conversation now. I continued to insist, lightly but directly, "Is there something I need to know? I just want to understand why you're like this." She took a deep breath and replied, this time with a tired look, "Seriously, there's nothing wrong. You don't need to worry about it." That response felt like a full stop in our conversation, but in my mind, it only brought more questions. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. I was suddenly overwhelmed with the urge to grab her phone and look for answers. I felt guilty for thinking that, but at the same time, the idea of being the last to know, of living a lie, was unbearable. Even with my fears and suspicions growing, I tried to remain calm. I tried to brush it off, hoping everything would return to normal. But the tension between us only increased, and each day I felt more disconnected from the woman I loved so much. With each question, each attempt to get closer, Daniela closed off even more. It felt like I was talking to someone completely different, someone I barely knew. This strangeness only fueled my distrust, but I tried to believe, somehow, that she was being sincere. In an attempt to maintain peace, I began to let some things slide. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, a stressful period that would soon dissipate. However, Daniela's routine continued to change in increasingly inexplicable ways. Before, we had an organized life and our schedules were synchronized. Now, every week something new came up. A sudden work trip, a last-minute meeting, or a night out with friends that didn't include an invitation for me. One night, during dinner, I tried to bring up the idea of spending a weekend together, just the two of us, to unwind a bit. I hoped she would see it as an opportunity to relax and reconnect. How about we hit the road on Saturday? Go to that cabin you loved so much? We could disconnect for a bit. She seemed to hesitate, which left me unsettled. Before, she was the one proposing these moments, so seeing her reluctant reaction made me suspicious. After a few seconds, she replied, "Oh, that would be great, but I don't know if I can. This project at work is consuming me, you know? It could be complicated." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. But when I pressed a bit more, her expression changed, and she quickly changed the subject. This was new and quite disconcerting. Daniela had always been someone with an organized routine, but it seemed that lately every commitment, every hour of the day, was shaped with no consideration for our time together. These changes were painful, but I tried not to interpret everything as a sign of betrayal. Still, the discomfort was undeniable. One specific weekend, she mentioned a work gathering she needed to attend and asked me not to wait up for her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind filled with unsettling thoughts, wondering what could be happening. The next morning, she arrived late with the sun already up. I tried to hide my anxiety, but I couldn't help but ask, "Was the party good?" I questioned, trying to sound casual but unable to completely mask the tension in my voice. Daniela shrugged and replied with that vague tone that was becoming her trademark. It was nice. But now I just want to sleep. I watched her as she climbed the stairs to our bedroom, not even bothering to elaborate on what had happened or share the funny stories she used to tell when returning from any event. It seemed that little by little she was drifting away from me, creating a barrier that I couldn't understand or break down. Every change in her routine was a reminder that something was different, but I didn't want to seem possessive. Despite all the signs, I was still willing to wait and give the benefit of the doubt. After all, sometimes love requires patience and understanding, right? I forced myself to believe that, but inside I felt an emptiness that seemed to grow more and more. The tension between us was reaching an unbearable point. My instinct told me something was wrong, but I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. I wanted to believe that Daniela was still the loyal and sincere person she had always shown herself to be, but that trust was being tested with every new strange behavior. Then, on a night that seemed like any other, something happened that completely threw me off balance. I was in my home office, finishing up some work tasks. Daniela said she was going out for a meeting, but she didn't give many details. When her phone started vibrating in the living room, I realized she had forgotten it at home. That was unusual, as she had seemed glued to her phone lately. A dark thought caught me off guard, and before I could contain my curiosity, I got up and went to the phone. I looked at the lit screen, where there was a message from a contact I had never seen before. It was a notification from a messaging app with a preview that read, "I'm waiting for you in the usual place. Can't wait to see you." I froze, my heart racing. Those words sounded like a bitter confirmation of all my suspicions. I took a deep breath and for a moment considered unlocking the phone to see the other messages. However, the fear of actually confirming what I already suspected was greater. That message seemed enough. I could no longer deny what was happening. My first impulse was to call Daniela and ask her what was going on, demand answers. But I held the phone for a few seconds, trying to stay calm and remember all the time she emphasized the importance of trust. Ironic, I thought. The one who always talked so much about trust was now breaking mine in the worst possible way. With a weight in my chest, I put the phone back on the table and sat on the couch, completely stunned. Various memories flashed through my mind. Our happy moments, the plans we made together, the promises we exchanged. All of it now seemed like a big lie, a performance she had been staging while I believed blindly. Some time later, Daniela came home. I went into alert mode, my mind torn between confronting her right away or waiting longer to see how far this would go. But upon seeing her natural smile, as if nothing were out of place, I felt a pang of anger and disappointment that I had never felt before. She approached me and gave me a quick kiss, noticing that I was too quiet. "Are you okay?" she asked, perhaps already noticing my dark expression. I wanted to unload everything at that moment, ask about the message, demand that she tell me what was going on, but I held back. I just nodded, trying to hide my anguish, and replied, "Just a little tired." She smiled and said she would go change, acting with the same naturalness as always. I watched her as she went up the stairs, and in that instant, all my trust had turned into pure distrust and sadness. I knew I needed to find out the truth, but I still felt incapable of confronting her. That night, I could hardly sleep, and my mind was stuck on that message, imagining all the possibilities it could mean. It was clear that something was happening, and I would need to prepare myself to deal with what was to come. After that message, everything changed within me. Every smile from Daniela, every touch, every word from her sounded different, loaded with a weight that she had no idea I already knew. I knew I needed to confront her at some point, but I still didn't have the courage. Instead, I decided to take a more subtle approach, observing her reactions, trying to find an explanation without having to lay everything out in the open. The first opportunity arose the following weekend. She had mentioned that she was going to an event with some friends, but when I asked who they would be, she hesitated for a second longer than usual, as if she were improvising a response. My heart raced, and I decided to take the chance to see how far she would take that lie. "That's great. I'll take the opportunity to go out too," I said casually. "Maybe I'll call Lucas. It's been a while since we last saw each other. Who knows, maybe he'll show up there too." Daniela froze for a moment before breaking into a quick but nervous smile. "Oh, that will be good for you," she replied, trying to sound cheerful. "We'll meet at home later then." I noticed that her response lacked confidence. It felt like someone who felt secure in not being caught. As soon as she left, I made a tough decision. I waited a few minutes and left too. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I had a vague idea of where I might find her. At that moment, reason seemed to have gone out the window, and all I had left was the need to find the truth, no matter the cost. I arrived in the city center, where I knew there were some bars and restaurants that Daniela usually frequented with friends. I walked through the streets, my heart racing and my hands sweating. I knew that if I found her, I would probably discover something that could destroy what little peace I had left. Still, I pressed on, driven by a mix of anger and anxiety. After half an hour of searching, I was almost ready to give up when I spotted a group of people entering a nice restaurant. Among them was Daniela, arm in arm with someone I had never seen before. The scene was as clear as it was devastating. They were laughing, chatting animatedly, and she looked like a person I didn't recognize, relaxed, engaged, almost as if that were her true world. I felt such a strong mix of anger and sadness that I almost rushed up to them, but I held back. I didn't want to make a scene. Instead, I stood watching from afar, my heart shattered, trying to understand how all of this had happened right under my nose. When Daniela finally returned home that night, I was waiting in the living room, trying to hold myself together. She walked in smiling, unaware that I already knew everything. I needed a way to approach the subject without ruining everything, but at the same time, every word from her seemed to poison me. "Did you have a good time with your friends?" I asked, keeping my gaze steady. She hesitated but quickly composed herself, responding casually, "Yeah, it was great. I needed that, you know?" Her answer sounded so fake that I had to take a deep breath to avoid confronting her immediately. Instead, I just nodded, trying to maintain the facade of believing her. But inside, I already knew that this conversation was a silent preparation for the real confrontation that was about to come. I just needed one more piece of evidence, something she couldn't deny, to lay the whole truth on the table. The days that followed that night were filled with unbearable tension. I tried to act normally, but everything in me demanded a definitive answer. The image of Daniela with that stranger wouldn't leave my mind, and every time she touched me or smiled, it felt like I was being stabbed. I knew I had to find a way to end that doubt once and for all. Then I had an idea. It wasn't something I would ever consider doing in another situation, but I was at a point where the truth was worth more than anything. I decided to take a look at her phone while she slept. I knew the password, and for the first time, I felt I had a reason to use it. I waited until she was deep asleep, and in the silence of the night, I took her phone. When I opened it, my breath caught. I went straight to the messages, and there was the name of the contact I had seen in the previous message. My heart racing, I opened the conversation. What I found left me speechless. Affectionate messages, inside jokes, and worse yet, plans for past and future meetings. There were declarations of affection she hadn't made to me in months. One of the most recent texts said, "I can't wait to be together again. Every moment with you makes me forget everything." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. That was the proof I had feared so much, but at the same time, it was what I needed to put all doubts to rest. For a moment, I stood there, staring at the phone. Part of me still wanted it all to be a misunderstanding that somehow she could explain. But it was evident that there was no other interpretation. Slowly, I put the phone back in its place and stepped away, my mind boiling with thoughts. I returned to the bedroom, but I couldn't lie down next to her. I went to the couch, trying to digest what I had just discovered. During those hours of insomnia, thoughts came and went, mixed with anger, sadness, and a sense of helplessness I had never experienced before. The next morning, Daniela woke up and found me in the living room, still wearing the same cold and distant expression. She noticed my tense posture and asked, with a hint of concern, "Did you sleep here? Is something wrong?" It was the question I had been waiting for, the cue I needed to start the confrontation. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye, letting all the weight of the truth fall between us. "Yes, something happened, Daniela. I know about you and—" I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "About your friend." Her smile vanished, and her expression changed to something between shock and guilt. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She knew there was nothing left to hide, and the mask she had maintained until then finally fell. I continued, "I saw the messages. I saw you together. You don't have to lie anymore." Daniela lowered her eyes, unable to hold my gaze. The room fell silent, and in that moment, I knew our relationship was over, even if she still tried to explain herself. She started to speak, trying to justify the unjustifiable, but her words sounded empty to me. It didn't matter anymore. All that was left was to face the harsh reality. The person I trusted most had betrayed me in the coldest and most calculated way. Daniela remained silent for a long time, her face carrying the expression of someone who had just been unmasked. Finally, in a low and hesitant voice, she tried to say something, but it seemed difficult to organize her words. I watched her, hoping she would say something that would at least help me understand how we had gotten to this point. I'm really sorry," she began, her eyes downcast, unable to meet my gaze. "I never wanted it to be this way. I never thought this would happen." I felt a wave of indignation rising within me. It was as if she were trying to soften the situation, as if her betrayal could be explained or justified. That only fueled my anger and sadness. "How did this happen, Daniela? Since when?" I asked, my voice coming out harsher than I had intended. "Or have you always been like this and I just never noticed?" She took a deep breath, seeming to finally realize that there was no escape. With a trembling voice, she began to speak. It was a few months ago. I met him at one of those work meetings. At first, it was just a friendship, someone I could talk to. And gradually, I got attached more than I should have. More than I should have. That phrase echoed in my mind like a punch to the stomach. I tried to remain calm, but every word from her felt like a stab. "And what did you think would happen, Daniela?" I asked, trying to contain the pain. "Did you think I would never find out? Or that it was all okay just because you were unhappy?" She flinched when she heard my question. It seemed she was searching for some justification that could alleviate the weight of what she had done. "I know it was wrong," she said, tears beginning to stream down her face. "But you pulled away too, you know? You were always busy, always involved in your work, and I felt alone. I felt like something was missing between us." Those words hit me hard. Part of me wanted to believe that she truly felt something akin to remorse, but what I saw was an attempt to shift the blame onto me to justify the unjustifiable. I approached her, looking her in the eyes, allowing her to feel the pain and indignation that were overflowing in me. "All couples have ups and downs, Daniela. If something was missing, why didn't you come talk to me?" I questioned, my voice low but filled with resentment. "Instead, you chose to betray my trust." She lowered her head, speechless. It was evident that there was nothing more she could say to fix the situation. The weight of what she had done was clear, and any attempt at justification only further aggravated the situation. After a long silence, I finally said, "I don't want to hear any more excuses. I just want to know what you intend to do from here. Because, honestly, I don't see how we can move forward after this." She looked at me, still with tears in her eyes, and murmured something almost inaudible. "I don't know. I really don't know." I didn't want things to end like this. Hearing that, I realized that there was nothing holding me there anymore. Trust had been broken, and all the promises we once made no longer held any value. I stood up, feeling a deep emptiness, but knowing it was time to end that chapter. "So, I guess we have nothing more to talk about," I concluded, giving her one last look. "You made your choice, and I will make mine." Without waiting for a response, I headed to the bedroom, grabbed a few things, and left the house, leaving behind not only the home we had built together, but also all the memories of a love that now existed only in the past. That night, I left the house I shared with Daniela, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I had only a backpack on my back and an uncertain future ahead. The streets seemed deserted, and the city, which had once been our home, now felt empty, almost hostile. There were no plans, no direction. Just an urgent need to distance myself from everything that reminded me of her. I spent a few days at a friend's house who welcomed me without asking questions. He knew I needed space and time to understand what had happened, and his silence was one of the few things that brought me some comfort. However, each night, when the quiet took over, reality hit me hard. Every memory, every smile, every moment we shared came flooding back, along with the bitter reminder of betrayal. The following weeks were a painful process of rebuilding. As difficult as it was, I knew I needed to get back to my routine, my work, and my life. However, no matter how hard I tried, it seemed there was a constant shadow, a persistent reminder that everything I believed I had built alongside her was now a lie. Many times I found myself questioning where I had failed, what I could have done to prevent things from reaching this point. One day, while reorganizing some of my belongings that were still at my friend's house, I found a box of old memories, concert tickets, photos, notes we exchanged in the early months together. Looking at those moments frozen in time where happiness seemed real and tangible brought me a mix of pain and longing, but also the feeling that it was time to move on, to leave it all behind. I decided to start the process of dividing our belongings, something I had been postponing, as every conversation with Daniela seemed to open new wounds. However, I knew it was necessary to definitively close that chapter of my life. So one afternoon, I sent her a message proposing that we resolve our outstanding matters quickly and practically. She agreed, and we arranged to meet at the old apartment. When I arrived, the house felt strangely empty, even though many of our belongings were still there. Daniela was waiting, and the silence between us was so thick that we could barely look at each other. I felt that, despite everything, that place had lost its charm. Every wall, every object seemed just a reminder of our failure. We began to divide the items, trying to be rational and respectful, but it was impossible to avoid the tension. At one point, she broke the silence with a hesitant voice. "I'm so sorry." "Really? I know this doesn't change anything, but I'm truly sorry for what I did." I looked at her, seeing a mix of regret and sadness. But I no longer had the strength to carry that pain. I gave a brief nod, not prolonging the subject, and continued with the task. Her words sounded empty. It was too late for regrets. As much as I also felt the pain of the end, I knew my path now needed to be away from her. Once we finished, I took what belonged to me and left without looking back. That night, for the first time, I felt a strange lightness, a sense of freedom. It wasn't exactly happiness, but a certainty that I had done what was necessary. The months that followed were of healing. Slowly, I resumed old hobbies, made new friends, and little by little, rediscovered a life where I didn't need to seek approval or worry about what I had left behind. The journey to rebuild oneself after a betrayal is long and painful, but in that moment, I realized I was ready to move on. Time passed, and with it, I adapted to my new reality. The first few weeks were the hardest. The emptiness of the apartment we once shared, the memories ingrained in every corner, were constant reminders of everything I had lost. But as the months went by, I found ways to cope with that pain. Work, conversations with friends, even daily routines helped fill the spaces that were once occupied by her presence. Despite this, there were days when the ghosts of the past returned with more intensity. There were moments when I found myself thinking about Daniela, the times we had together, and even the person she had become. Questions about the why of it all still arose, but slowly I learned to stop seeking answers. What happened between us was something I could not control, and trying to understand the reasons behind the betrayal was just another burden I needed to leave behind. It was then, after a while, that I received a message from her. It was simple, straightforward, but enough to make my heart leap. She wrote, "Can we talk? I know there's nothing left between us, but I have something I need to say. Something that might help you understand." Those words caught me off guard. I knew I shouldn't, that the decision I had made was final, but somehow curiosity overpowered me. There was something there that might finally give me closure. I took a deep breath and after a brief moment of hesitation, replied, "Okay." "Where?" I said a meeting at the same cafe where we used to spend our afternoons together. It was a place that now carried a heavy emotional weight, but I knew that was the point where we had to say our final goodbye. When I arrived, Daniela was already there, sitting at the table where we used to meet. She looked calmer, with an expression different from the one I remembered. There was no more nervousness or guilt in her eyes. She seemed more serene. I sat down without saying a word, waiting for her to speak. Daniela looked at me for a moment, almost as if weighing her words. Then, finally, she spoke in a low voice but full of sincerity. "I know that nothing I say can change what happened, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I just want you to know that my betrayal wasn't about you. It wasn't because I didn't love you or because I didn't care about what we had. I was lost. I lost myself in my insecurities, my expectations, and ended up making the stupidest decision of my life." I watched her in silence, feeling a mix of anger and compassion. She was being honest, but her words didn't erase what she had done. They didn't erase what I had felt, what had destroyed me. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued, her voice choked. But I needed you to know that deep down, I always respected you. What I did was a terrible mistake, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for it. I knew that even after all her words, nothing could erase what she had done. The betrayal, as much as it was a human failing, could never be justified. But something in me, perhaps the person I was before the pain took over, still managed to see the sincerity in her words. I no longer felt anger, but I also knew that we could never go back. I understand, I said, my voice calm but firm. I needed to move on, Daniela, because in the end, all I was looking for was the truth, and now I know. I just hope that one day you find what you're looking for too, for yourself. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes filled with profound sadness. She was no longer the woman I had known, but someone who, like me, was trying to find herself amid the pain she caused and the pain she suffered. I hope you're truly happy, she said, with visible sadness. You deserve that. Silence enveloped us again. There were no more words to be said. What happened between us could not be undone, and that meeting, although laden with pain, was the closure we both needed. I stood up, offering her one last glance, and left the cafe without looking back. Now, with more clarity, I knew that the path I took when leaving that relationship was the only choice I had left. Deep down, I was stronger than before, more aware of what I deserved, and above all, more conscious of what life had in store for me moving forward. The new beginning had already started, and I was ready to move on, free from the weight of the past, in search of a lighter future and, who knows, a happier one. And so, the journey of overcoming and self-discovery begins. What seemed to be the end of a story was, in fact, the beginning of a new phase for our protagonist. A phase where pain gave way to acceptance and emptiness was filled with new possibilities. Sometimes, life challenges us with painful situations, but as we saw in this story, true strength lies in moving forward, learning from mistakes, and making room for what's to come. What would you do if you were in his place? How would you react after discovering a betrayal that shook your deepest foundations? We want to know your opinion. Leave your comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and share your own experiences or reflections on the subject. This is a space for all of us to learn together to support those who are also going through tough times. And if you like this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing content like this with stories that touch the soul and make us reflect. Oh, and don't go just yet. Click on the link that will appear on the screen to watch the next video. It's a real guide to overcoming and will help you take the next step in your emotional journey. Don't miss it.